what I'd like to talk to you guys about today is how do you thrive in the middle of something like this? I mean, it's already rough enough sometimes when we're in a job seeking space, but now you've got this whole COVID thing. You just get the world's kind of feeling like it's falling apart. This newest stuff that's going on with all of the crazy polarization that's going on in the world. All of that can make it even that much more challenging. And certainly the way the economy has been wrecked, there's so many people out of work. So how do you thrive in the middle of that? And part of that is thriving in the job search itself, but then part of that's thriving in your life holistically. And so what I'd like to share with you is how some mindset things, some technology things, some creativity and some community things that I think make a huge difference. They've certainly made a huge difference for me and people that I've been coaching and working with. And so let's dive in. So I like this. Quarantine is what brings us together today. Obviously not really that, but that's definitely the thing that's made it be that much more interesting. And I don't know about you, but when this thing first started, I feel like the thing has really taken a different face as it's occurred. You know, at the beginning, you might recall that with the lockdown started, right when spring break happened, and everybody, it was like 2 weeks, and kind of everybody was like, well, hey, instead of a 1 week spring break, I got a 2 week spring break. It was almost kind of fun, right? That's when I was playing with all these memes. I was part of this group, and we were just saying, well, you know, let's just have some humor with it, right? And so that was kind of fun for a while. But let me ask you, so how do you see it like now, right? You know, or how have you seen it as you've gone through it? You know, maybe you were, kind of rejecting it. You kind of thought this is crazy, or maybe you felt like a little bit of a victim from it, or maybe you're just kind of waiting for it to be over hopelessly, or you're just doing the best that you can given the circumstances, or maybe you saw some opportunities and you started to take them, right? Or maybe you're like, hey, I am going to be strong-minded and I'm going to thrive no matter what happens here. I'm going to figure it out. I don't know. Where were you? Right. So that's kind of the thing to think about and explore. How can you choose which mindset that you want to get to? So when we were doing those memes, it was because of this. I love Who Framed Roger Rabbit, this quote where he says, you know, a laugh can be a powerful thing. Sometimes it's the only weapon we have. Now, as a Christian, we know that, you know, we have Jesus Christ, but still, humor is very powerful, and it was kind of fun to kind of have a little fun at the expense of this. And so we were looking at some things. This was the original Zoom meeting, you know, back in the '60s when we had the Brady Bunch. This is where I think they got their idea for the layout for Zoom meetings. And as you can see, just like now, Alice is, incognito, and Jan got herself on mute, and all those things that we're learning about in the Zoom world today as we're playing around, right? I think one of the funny things that I heard early on was that, in Zoom meetings, you have a moment where somebody yells pants, and everybody has to stand up and see, if you were really prepared to be in the meeting, right? And so I found this meme, which was kind of a good one, right? It's a little off color, but this kind of thing can happen sometimes in Zoom meetings when people are still learning the technology and don't know what they're doing, right? So I'm a big fan of comics, of Marvel specifically. My sons and I have had a long tradition of going and seeing those movies together. And if you know that universe of characters, they also have this magazine called What If. And What If is a magazine that recast that network. So it's kind of fun. Like you have this universe of characters that have a certain set of rules, but then in What If they can break all the rules. So, this one was, what if Spider-Man became part of the Fantastic Four, and you'd have the Fantastic Five? So I got to thinking about, like, what if, COVID-19 had happened in March 2002? What would that be like, right? Well, it'd be pretty horrible, because, if you were out trying to do a job search, well, you didn't have LinkedIn. If you were trying to be social and connect with people, you didn't have Facebook yet, right? We didn't have YouTube, so you couldn't be learning and stuff like many people have been doing during this time. You had no iPhones, right? So you'd have to be, tethered to a phone or just a regular phone. Entertainment, no streaming. You'd have to go out and get it. No video calling. So everything would just, be so much worse. Even Amazon was pretty much selling books and just music and a few things. You couldn't have had most things delivered to your house. So it would have been really horrible if this would have happened in 2002, right? And so, we're lucky because we have a lot of power at our fingertips with these kinds of technologies and things today, right? Um, and I think that that's valuable in the middle of this. We don't really have to be so much socially distanced. We just have to be physically distanced. And so, how can we keep going and leverage all of this? And if you think about businesses and companies, they've been using technology ahead of us, right? They can practice things like geo arbitrage and expensive technology that can manage systems. But nowadays, a lot of that capability is right at the fingertips of people. And so, sticking with our theme of Spider-Man, any true Spider-Man fan has heard, with great power comes great responsibility. And we have this power, so we can take this responsibility of being able to continue to move forward in our world, as long as we realize that we do have that power to move forward. And that's kind of one of the mindset things, is that we have a lot of power. Now, if you take it from a Christian perspective, my favorite scripture in the Bible is Romans 12:1 and 2. It's the one that Jesus introduced himself to me personally with. And I really love this space of in view of God's mercies that he starts that with, because God's mercies are new every morning, right? And what I noticed early on, after I got past the memes, was that everything in nature was still doing its thing, right? The sun came up every morning, the grass grew every morning, the birds were still flying, everything in nature was doing its thing. And so I said to myself, man, what calling does Todd have? And yes, he may have to do it differently, but why would he not be doing it at this time if the rest of nature can do its thing at this time? And so that renewing of my mind let me start to say, hey, I am going to figure out how to do and thrive in this moment. I'm going to do something because I'm called to do something, and this circumstance shouldn't stop it. So we noticed at that point in time that the bluebonnets were out, and a lot of people weren't going and getting their pictures done like normal, but we did. And as you can see, we found one that was socially distancing from the rest of them. And so that was cool. But they came up and they did their thing. And we said we need to be doing our thing too, right? And so I started helping a lot of people with Zoom because I understood these technologies. I've been using them for a little bit longer. And I realized many companies had to really suddenly reinvent themselves in a digital landscape. And so that started to be very helpful. But I was also helping some people, not just businesses. And many of them said, hey, Todd, you should do something that helps people with that. So I wrote a little ebook that was just helping people learn how they could connect with their families, with their friends, continue to work, and taught them a little bit about the technology, but also about creativity and community and caring, based on some of the things we've learned in the Stephen ministry work. And so that was kind of a cool thing to do. But then we started tracking what other people were doing, right? So we had a neighbor who, right at Easter, created, a bunch of Easter eggs out of rocks and hid them around, and then sent it out to the neighborhood group so that the kids could find these things, since, you couldn't, do as many things as before. And so as you would just walk around, you would find these little eggs. And then kids were putting up things. And I really liked this particular chalk thing from some of the kids down the street that said, we can do hard things. Because it occurred to me that, in Stephen ministry, almost all the people that we have in our Stephen ministry group have been through really hard things. And that's why they really love to care for other people in crisis. In case you don't know what Stephen ministry is, it's a one-on-one ministry that cares for people who have gone through a crisis, like the loss of a loved one, or divorce, or the loss of a job. And so almost everybody that does that kind of work has had difficult things happen in their life. And so, is really COVID-19 the hardest thing that I've had happen in my life? It is definitely not. And I don't think it is for most people too, but it kind of got in our heads for a while. And so this is where getting out of that mindset helps, right? So this is what's called a life wheel in coaching. And it's a division of different parts of your life. And what you do is you rate each of these areas on the scale of 1 to 10. So 1 being, it's not necessarily working as well as I want, and 10, it's fabulous. And so you can go around and kind of, do a self-evaluation of your business career, of your finances, of your health, right? And there's a lot of questions that as a coach, sometimes I will help people through. Like for instance, once you grade all of this, right, you might just ask the question, one thing might be to see what you could do to improve every single area, but that can be overwhelming. So what I'll typically ask people is, what is the one area that if you moved it up 1 or 2 notches would have the greatest benefit to the other areas, right? And that way you can focus on one thing and get benefit across the board, right? So when you look at this, you can ask yourself the question at this point in time, during this time of COVID-19, have I experienced a loss in these areas or a growth in these areas? Which one, right? And so I wanted to make sure I was figuring out growth and looking at growth. And one of the things that I was personally working on was my health. It's been a journey I've been on for a while. And right now I'm doing some very, very specific diet things that were difficult to do. And so it dawned on me that I had more control of my eating plan and my diet plan and even workout at this time than any other time, right? So let's just play with that. So if I eat well because I'm more in control of the content, well, then I'm here eating well. So I'm cooking with my wife. And so we have some time together and maybe we can do a devotional during breakfast or something. And because we're both here, because she's not running off to do something. And then, well, I can also take some extra time to learn new skills. I can, like maybe even cooking, I can set up my environment to be better physically and maybe even a better physical environment to support my virtual one. Like once you learn that you need the light to face you instead of behind you, you can reset your environment up to support that. But obviously, if I'm eating in, I'm spending less money. So that's helping my financial and it's simplifying things. And it gives me time to connect with friends and have some walks with God and with my wife. So, even one thing can kind of make an adaptation around that whole frame. And that's kind of a mindset trick, right? Is how do you say, hey, I want to get into that mindset and, be able to really do more, even when it seems like I have less. So that's kind of my main charge is to say, hey, take the challenge that you can do anything. You just have a circumstance you have to factor in and be all in on factoring in that circumstance. Now, let's talk about the tech, right? Because this is where this is a lot new for most people, right? Many people haven't had to deal with this kind of technology. They're pretty new to it. Now, for me, I've been using this kind of technology for several years and was working remotely with people for 8 and 10 years before that. But how do you think about it, especially if you're unfamiliar with it, right? And so one of the first things I try to help people do is to get past being afraid of it and just spend some time being prepared. One of the cool things that most people don't realize they can do with Zoom is you can log into a Zoom meeting by yourself. You don't have to be with anybody else. So you can get in and practice all the controls without having to be embarrassed or anything, right? And so, you got to think about the importance of play. Like none of you would buy a chainsaw and just pull it out of the box and go cut down a big, red oak or something. You would want to first, kind of play with that and learn how it worked and turn it on and off. You would play. And so when you spend some time with the technology that you're not familiar with, kind of playing with it, getting used to it, then you can get the tech out of the way. You can quit worrying so much about the tech and you can be way more authentic when you're talking to somebody through camera. So now when you get to that place where you have to do an interview with somebody through Zoom, you can actually be really dynamic because you've actually taken the time to play. Of course, you can also be playing by visiting with friends and others and staying connected using the technology as well. So all of that gives you a place where you're learning that technology in the course of play, and then it becomes more natural and it becomes more familiar and it becomes second nature, right? Now, there's some other things you've got to do that are a little unfamiliar with this technology, right? If you think about a walkie-talkie, an old school walkie-talkie, you'll recall that you had to like press it down to talk and you had to let go for you to be able to hear the other person. And Zoom is kind of like that, right? Because when you are wanting to look in someone's face, like when you're meeting somebody face to face, you would be looking at their face, you'd be looking in their eyes, and you would have a powerful connection because we connect through the eyes. However, if you're looking at someone's eyes on your screen, you're not looking at their eyes because their eyes are your camera, right? So you have to kind of use that walkie-talkie trick. You have to say, hey, if I want to connect with them with what I'm trying to convey to them, I need to be looking at my camera. If I really want to be listening to them and see their body language, then I need to look at the screen. Now, you want those two to be as close to each other as possible, but you need to know when you're doing one versus the other, right? And be intentional about it. And so once you get used to that and you get your brain programmed for that, it becomes kind of second nature. So again, it comes through playing. You can optimize your layout, really getting, again, where your camera and your screen is as close as possible. You also need to think about what's going on. I mean, you are connecting over an internet connection, and that connection may or may not be stable or fast enough. And so this is where, you want to make sure you're connected with, a really good wireless, or even better yet, in a wired connection. You want to have the link available in case the technology just fails. You're not searching for it. You can get back in really, really quickly. You want to kind of think about those kind of things. And then just where do you have your camera and your lights, right? So a lot of times people will have their camera here, but their screen over here. And so they're talking to people, but they're looking at the screen. And you might notice that every now and then I'm looking over here to see my notes, but then I'm right back with you. Okay. So what you don't want to be doing is constantly looking this way while you're talking to somebody, because then you feel like you're distracted by something else, right? So you kind of want your camera where you are most of the time, and you want the lights back behind it. And so that you're lit up, not behind you, so that you're silhouetted, right? So all of those kinds of prep things help you get prepared so that when you do an interview or you do meet with somebody, whether it's an informational interview or whether it's a formal interview, you've got those kinds of things set up. Now, the other thing you can do is to think about is beforehand is who are you meeting with? And this would be true even if you were meeting with them live, right? Who are they? How can I best serve their needs? What do I need to have prepared? What can I know about them in advance? And so, when you combine those things together, then you can have a really powerful meeting. Now, when you get to the meeting itself, let's just talk about some tips there, right? First off, dress the part, right? If you're going to go in an interview, be more formally dressed, and don't be Captain Pants, right? And actually dress the part. You'll feel it better. It'll help you. Prep your environment. Make sure you tell your partner or the pets or kids, or turn your phone off. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been on while this is going on where somebody's wife will walk in and start talking to them about how a doctor called or something. And you're like, oh my gosh, please put yourself on mute, right? And so you've got to learn how to control that kind of work. You also need to be prepared if you are going to share something with somebody. Make sure you have only the things you want to share up and not anything else. And again, I've been in a meeting with investors that were presenting, or entrepreneurs that were presenting to investors, and had one of the entrepreneurs end up sharing a financial spreadsheet rather than his presentation, right? Don't have those things up, have what you need to share up. And so you just learn these skills to prepare yourself. Log in a few minutes early, organize your screen and anything else you're going to use, especially if you only have one screen. Figure out how everything's going to be at your fingertips where you can see it. And then just, pray, release tension. Just say, hey, look, I'm getting to meet somebody today. Come back to that mindset. I get to meet somebody. I don't got to do this thing, over Zoom. I get to meet somebody face to face, even though we can't be physically together. And just, take some deep breaths, stretch, and go and be yourself in front of the camera, knowing that you really are being in front of a person, even though it feels like you're just looking at a camera. The more you can sort of visualize that, the more it becomes simple for you. So hopefully some of those tips help. Is there any questions or anything on that? Anything that you guys else would ask about that would be helpful to you? Y'all can put them in the chat or come off mute if you want to ask them. Anything?
I just learned last week, Todd, that when you're on mute, if you just hit your space bar, it takes you off mute. So you don't have to go look for where you have to click.
Yes, and it works exactly like that walkie-talkie thing, right? Like as long as you hold it down, you're talking. The minute you let go, it's off. And it has a little bit of a delay, but yes, it does work. You can totally do that. Really good. Well, this is actually my ACE group, and so they're a perfect example of some of the things you don't want to do. Sorry, Mitch. But we got our witness protection program buddy here. He's got some backlighting going on. We have the up nose guy. This is a guy who's got his camera down here, and maybe he's way down there. And you don't want to do that. That's actually not a good look. This is really probably somebody really just having their screen different than their camera, but it makes them look like they're disengaged, right? Um, you can see Mitch is doing a great job. He's the student here. He's the right guy. This guy looks like he's distracted. He's probably just taking some notes or something. And by the way, one of the questions I've had in the previous one is, what if you do need to take some notes, or what if you need to refer to your notes? Well, what I would say is, if you're moving with purpose, it's better than if you're just glancing down like this because you look kind of shady. And especially if you just tell somebody, if you give them the context, you say, hey, let me look at my notes real quick. Oh yeah, here's what I wanted to tell you. Totally makes sense, right? If you just kind of do it and they don't know why you're doing it, then they start to think, oh, well, I guess he's just playing solitaire or something on a screen, right? So, you can bring context in the conversation. I don't recommend using virtual backgrounds. They're fun to play with, but they make you blurry and they create a lot of artifacts. Um, and look, if you're going to a meeting, be present. Don't be incognito. I mean, it's okay. It's okay. There's a time and a place. And sometimes it's good, especially when someone's presenting, to back out, because then everybody gets more focused on the presenter rather than the grid of 49 people. But like, if you're really meeting and you're having a dialogue, you definitely don't want to be doing that, right? So, instead of doing the virtual background, have a clean, good background with good separation in it, or just, aim right. Definitely don't show the ceiling fan, one of the most distracting things possible. Um, vents, things like that. Try to get yourself where you have a good background in the back. And then you really kind of want your head to be pretty close to the top of the screen, not in the center, right? If you can, you want to really be filling the screen up a little bit more. So anyway, those are just a couple of tips that will make it more powerful. Now, when you combine that with the scheduling capabilities, here's another thing that people get kind of stuck on is, Zoom requires you to kind of schedule it. You have to, create a meeting, you have to send somebody an invite. And one of the things you can have when you're doing a job search or you're trying to set up a lot of interviews is you ask one person, you say, well, hey, when would you like to meet? You would like to meet at 3:00 on Thursday. And he doesn't get back with you for a while, right? And you kind of forget that you said that. Meantime, somebody else says, hey, I'd like to get together with you. Will 3:00 on Thursday work? So you set that up. Then your first guy comes back and he goes, yeah, 3:00 is fine. Well, now you got a conflict and you're having to spend a whole bunch of time dealing with that. So, there are a lot of, while you can, connect Zoom to your calendar and make it work that way. And that's what I would recommend. You might also consider using a scheduling tool like Calendly or Acuity scheduling or Meeting Bird. What these things do is they layer in rules about when you want to meet people and different meeting times, but also connect to your calendar. So if you've already got something booked or you book something on your calendar, then nobody can go and set that. Now you can make it easy for people. You can just send them a link or a little bit of text like this that says, hey, my calendar is always up to date. Just click here and select a time that works for you on your schedule. And so that way you end up with no double appointments and you're not trying to double back and manage all of that. So I think these are really helpful when you're trying to meet a lot of people and do a lot of, informal and formal interviews with people. So would recommend y'all check some of those kinds of systems out. And then some other useful tools in the job searching thing are resume scanners. Your resume has to make it through job tracking systems. And so JobScan CO is a really good one. It basically looks at your resume and it looks at the job description and kind of says, how well are these going to really play together and likely get you through the applicant tracking system and get to a real person. And so, plus it'll just tell you a lot about how effective the keywords and things like that in your resume are. So that's a really good tool. I like to use some text expansion tools just to, you're filling out a lot of different applications and things like that. You're saying your name, your address, your website, your LinkedIn profile, and these things just with like 2 letters can just spit that out for you. So those are very helpful. Having things available, that way if someone contacts you while you're away and wants your resume, you don't have to wait to get back to your computer. You can use your OneDrive or your Google Drive and send it from your phone. And, another thing, if you're trying to build community, doing some things with things like Facebook group or LinkedIn groups or GroupMe can be good ways to interact with teams. I also put together a free planning tool. Like if you're actually hosting a lot of meetings, especially if they're not just one-on-ones, but larger groups, I have a Zoom planning tool that will help you think through all the kinds of things you might want to do and how to set your settings up for that. So you're free to hop out to my site and grab that for free if you want. Now, listen, during this time, I was able to work out. While all the gyms were closed, Camp Gladiator went out of their way and figured out how to do all that through Zoom. So that was kind of cool. When Easter came, my kids and I had a granddaughter that was born at the beginning of this. I only got to see her one time before it shut down. But we said, well, hey, we're gonna dress up for Easter and we're gonna have our own little Easter party, and we're gonna do it outside because it's a nice sunny day. And so you can just do these things when you decide that you can do them, right? So any other questions on the tech side of things before I hop into some creativity? Yeah, good. All right. So the other thing I think is really, really powerful at this time is just being creative. Yes, we have things we can't do, but we still have tons of things we can do. And it just kind of takes some creativity. And one thing to do is just ask God, to provide. One of the things that was going on for me at the beginning of this is I needed work, right, in my business, or I need to go back to work. And so, I needed to go do some things. And so, okay, God, where are you asking me to go? And so we begin to seek him on that. And we begin to ask other people too, which is a little bit about the community part. But I want to tell you this story that I heard many years ago by Earl Nightingale on the first $1 million audio recording that was ever made in the world, right? If you've never heard Lead the Field, still available, you have to go find it, but it's great. But in the last one of those episodes, he talks about a guy who during the Depression was able to find work. And so back during the Depression, which was still worse than where we are today, people were going around saying, I will do anything, just give me a job. And, one of the points that Earl made is that they were asking for a paycheck from a business who was, probably on the teetering on the brink of disaster themselves. And we are in that kind of space today. So what this guy decided to do was become part of the solution, right? And so instead of asking for a job, he began to really select a business that he really cared about and a career that he wanted to do. And then he spent a lot of time learning about it, talking to everybody in that industry, learning about its problems, just doing lots of research and thinking and doing informational interviews. And then he would call on the business owners and say, hey, I believe I have some ideas that would be valuable to you, and I'd like to sit down and just share them with you. And I think they could help you increase your business. And so now, while everybody else is saying, hey, please give me a job, he's saying, hey, can I serve you? Right. And he's, focused by then, he's specialized, he's ready to help in recovery, and, he would get the job. And so I think that mindset shift is a way in which we can be creative, right? What can you do to help and what can you do to serve? And if it not for maybe your primary career, how can you be serving towards that primary career, right? So could you be, writing about that topic on your blog, which would actually brand you better? I was on a session with JSN today that was talking about branding, and one of those very topics is to literally load up your LinkedIn, your Facebook, your own personal web page with expertise where you become the thought leader, right? So even if you can't immediately go straight to the job, like is suggested here, what can you do creatively to begin to show that you're the kind of person that could help in that particular space? So that's one thing I would recommend. The other thing is which kind of gets to the second thing, demonstrating your competency. You can use a blog, or you can volunteer, can you help in some other way? And then the other thing you can do is you can build trust in small things. So at the beginning of this season, I got asked to help with something that seemed very simple. It was just helping with the Zoom meeting. But then it turned out that needed a whole bunch of other things. And then it turned out that needed a whole website remake and a whole marketing make. And so consequently, much more has come because I just helped with that one thing that I was really capable of helping with, and then built trust, and that trust expanded out. So sometimes, you start with that. Someone was telling me kind of a cute way of saying that was, on your way to rob the bank, you might have to knock off a couple of convenience stores. I know that sounds horrible, but you know, you might have to do some small things on your way to getting the thing you're looking for, and helps demonstrate trust and your ability, right? So that's just another little thought for you. So there's obviously an infinite number of creative things. Those are just a couple that I've used and that I think are pretty powerful. And especially if you're helping with the small thing, keeping your eye on the bigger strategic thing, like giving more, right? Like I could have just done the Zoom meeting for this guy, but I begin to see that he needed other things and say, well, can I help you with this? Can I help you with that? Because he obviously needed the help with it. And then that led those things to happen. So just, you know, some other creative things. This is when we did Easter, right? We were doing communion in our church, and my wife wanted to take a cool picture. I have a photography background. So we did that. And then we were able to, you know, send that to a bunch of friends and tell them happy Easter, and just, again, using creativity during this time. So not just for the job search, but for your own well-being. And then let's talk about community. And this is one I really think is probably one of the most important things to talk about. You know, the tech stuff is new, but community can be difficult, but it's absolutely the key to all things. Now, one of the things is, you know, what keeps us from being able to leverage community sometimes is that we don't want to be vulnerable, and we're scared of trusting. You know, it's hard to go and say I'm in need. But I heard something about 12 years ago that has just really stuck with me. So you've all probably heard of the word fundraising before, but I heard a group that said what we start with is prayer raising. And so I was like, man, I love that. And so what happened for me at the very beginning of this is I did exactly that. I asked a whole bunch of different people. I kind of explained my situation a little bit, and I said, hey, would you pray for me for a while? And let me know if God tells you anything. And I just began to get all kinds of people calling me with thoughts and encouraging me, and with ideas and with opportunities, and things just begin to take off because God is really the provider. And when we just kind of open handed with him, and say, hey, I just need you to show up, Lord, and I'm going to go and ask others to pray for me on that, then without just expecting it has to be exactly the thing we think, then God's kind of free to do all kinds of wonderful things in our life. Now, the other thing that's happened during this time is that I would say to you guys that literally every single thing that's come to me during this time, right, has come not from anything I was doing in the job search, and everything by the way in which I've been operating and interacting with community. So, you know, I kind of got involved with job seekers, and I met Kara there, and she asked us to share LinkedIn connections, and we did. And then that led to some coffee Zooms and an informal group. And then, you know, then Kevin and I ended up having this conversation, and that's led to this. But all along the way, different job opportunities and different work within my business was coming from all of those connections as well. So, you know, be open to connecting with and supporting those that God brings to you in indirect ways. And so, like, I think a lot of times people will think, well, yeah, but that takes up more time to do community. But or yeah, sure, I need community. But the reality is, this is a very difficult thing to take alone. And just being able to do some of that has super, you know, powerful magic in it. And, you know, even in Jesus's words, where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I among them. That does not have to be literally together. That has to be together, right? And so that can be done on Zoom, just like it could be done in any other way. And so I really encourage you to take community seriously in this, because more jobs are found through networking and community than anything else. And so that's definitely why we want to put some of our focus on that here. And so, you know, this is me again meeting with my ACE guys every week, which has been probably my most fantastic source of community and support during this time, and I really appreciate them. This is Todd Boyum, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation of Fellowship Career Network. We meet every Monday evening from 6:30 to 8 p.m., and we hope you'll join us soon. To register and receive the Zoom link in your email, simply go to fellowshipcareernetwork.com today.